for joining us and coming on the show. Always a pleasure speaking with you and learning from you.
Likewise, Nitin. Avid follower of all things that you do, especially on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. Wonderful, Brian. So, Brian, for those that may not be familiar with you and what you do, can you please introduce yourself?
Of course. So Brian Cobb, Chief Innovation Officer for the Cincinnati Northern Kentucky International Airport, or CVG by IATA standard. And Chief Innovation Officer, which oversees our graphics and signage group, our information technologies group, and our customer experience group.
Wonderful, Brian. Those are a lot of important hats that you wear.
And very, very different from each other, frankly.
Yes. So, Brian, given that you have responsibilities that are so different and so important, when your leadership turns to you and they say, "Great job, Brian," what are they relying on you for the most?
Sure. Go back to those three very specific skill sets, and by which I would have to call out our customer experience team also includes our frontline housekeepers. So given the divergent work approaches, it's really incumbent upon me as a leader of the organization to find common ground, to find the commonality and to find the common links between those different organizations. And despite the variables across those organizations, how to bring it together as a cohesive bold or bond across to make sure that we are always delivering on superior customer service.
Yeah, Brian, and I've followed a lot of your work as well, online and at conferences, and I know you're passionate about making a positive impact on customers and focusing on customer experiences. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know that's a big passion of yours in really improving customer experiences. How you go about it, what your philosophy is, what a day in your life looks like.
Sure. So career-wise, I hate to date myself, but I've been at this for 30 years, actually. 20 years of which was with the airline side of the world. And then the last 10 years on the airport side. Despite the commonality in aviation, there are two very distinct structures. One was a public company, the other one's private. So really learning the best of both worlds and trying to find that common ground. I think where it comes back to customer experience is really a true appreciation for what it's like to be in the cabin and to understand before I can ever reach the cabin, I have to traverse through not only the airport, but I'm probably coming from a nearby hotel, or I just left friends and family, or I'm coming via an Uber. So understanding that customer journey, as we typically call it, and to really try to appreciate where do I have influence, not just as me personally, but me as an organization. And what responsibility does our organization have in influencing the outcome of your experience? So that is always really our primary focus, with a keen eye to really establishing a brand. And that's not common for airports to have a brand per se, especially in the US. But we very much view our product as CVG as a brand, and to make sure that we're always putting our best foot forward and making sure that our consumer receives the best experience possible in the interest of healthy competition and making sure that we are a growing, viable entity going forward.
That's great, Brian. So understanding the customer journey, like you said, and identifying things that matter to customers is important, right? And it's also a complex thing to do, as we all know.
Very
And
much
now
so.
you throw in something like a pandemic in the mix of things, and then it distorts and complexes something that was already complex, right? How
Absolutely.
how have you and your teams dealt with this?
Sure. That's the number one question typically now is we're starting to get back to some level of normalcy and checking in with colleagues on how did you do? How did you fare through this issue? I would have to say, number one, we're very fortunate in the position that CVG is. We saw COVID starting to impact the airport on our cargo side of the operation. Little known fact, we are the only airport in North America to have two major cargo carriers hubbed at one location. So we have DHL, which it's their second largest super hub. And we also have Amazon Prime. So Amazon Prime Air decided to make CVG actually their first global air hub. So massive development on the south side of our airfield. But we saw the factories starting to shut down in the APAC market, which naturally impacted the cargo implications. So as cargo was slowing down in about the January, February, March, we were starting to understand and appreciate, okay, it's definitely going to probably go around the world. And of course, thereafter, it was Italy, and then France, and then England. So totally appreciated the passenger side of the house. Unfortunately, cargo didn't really necessarily get the appreciation that it deserves, first and foremost. Cargo recovered very fast, and we're fortunate from that perspective because had the cargo industry been as affected as many other industries, just think about how we wouldn't have had the product delivered to our home because we weren't permitted to leave our home to go buy that product.
Right.
So the simple fact of companies like DHL and Amazon Prime Air and the other cargo organizations being able to not only make sure that their staff was healthy, but to keep their operation going, and most importantly, it was growing. So we've seen cargo numbers like we've never seen before. So phenomenal from that perspective that, passenger dramatically on our worst day, we were down to about 400 people through our security checkpoint when we typically would have about 13,000.
Wow.
The other slap in the face, if you will, is out of that 400, half of those were crew members. So really, there was only 200 passengers and a lot of crew members flying a lot of empty planes in the early days. So really disheartening, but the recovery has happened rather fast. I'm kind of impressed, frankly, especially post US holidays, December, January. We've seen a steady increase in activity. We continue to bump up around 10,000 passengers a day. And our typical daily volume would be 13,000. So we're only about 3,000 passengers off of where we typically would be. Not too bad. And that really goes back to making sure our tenant airlines and our concessionaires and everyone was doing the proverbial rowing in the same direction and understanding when the customers are ready to come back, we're going to be ready to serve them. So it's really trying to stay ahead of the curve, to which I think we've done remarkably well.
That's wonderful to hear, Brian. And I know a lot of your peers in this space have been dealing with similar challenges as well. I wanted to ask you, from a customer experience, a customer expectation standpoint, I know that you have a very good understanding of what their needs and expectations were pre-pandemic. And you have a good sense of the journeys that they undertake before they go, in their journey in interacting with the airport and the airlines and that entire trip. And then that all changed with the pandemic as well, in a way where they now have new needs, new expectations. There are new, guidelines, federal guidelines as well. How have you been spending any time, or have you been successful in sort of diving in deeper into these needs and expectations that they have right now?
Absolutely. From a success measure, I would say we're at this point, we're really kind of appreciating where the customer mindset is. And that's winning back the trust and the confidence in the industry. So post-COVID, and there hasn't been a whole lot of discussion around this, but post-COVID, one has to think the question will come up, or the conversation will come up, how quickly did this spread around the world? And we're going to be hard pressed as an industry to say, well, we didn't contribute to it. So, it's the best of, double-edged sword, if you will, of aviation gives you the opportunity and flexibility to travel around the world in half a day. However, when no one thought a pandemic could occur, and now that we've learned that a pandemic actually can happen, now we have to appreciate the fact of how at risk this industry is and what it is that we have to do on behalf of the common good around the world to make sure that we don't further contribute in a negative way. So a lot of interesting type scenarios where what is it that we do as an industry to try to limit travel out of hotspots so that we can, perhaps, as difficult as it may be, close a city or even a country from travel, but not impact the rest of the industry and impact, a dramatic number of countries.
Right.
So, there is no easy answer there. Then you get all the way down into the airport level. And sadly, I think some of us have learned this in the past, where if you take 9/11 for circumstances, that was a security issue ultimately. A lot of profiteering happened by individuals coming forward saying, oh, I have the latest and greatest in security that would prevent this from ever happening again. Buy my product. And there wasn't a whole lot of R&D behind it. So now we have cautiously, specifically CVG, have really dug into where's the research behind the science that you're suggesting. And if the science doesn't make sense, then we're not going down that path of working with that product. And it will do no good for customer goodwill if and when some of these products surface that they're not viable and they're not scientifically accurate. If you were in that position, we run the risk of hurting our integrity, and we run the risk of diminishing the trust that our customer may have regained, not only in us as an airport, but us as an industry. So a lot of tremendous responsibilities on all of our behalf in making sure that the industry is doing the right thing, definitely by the consumer, and that it's not a rush to judgment to try to fill gaps, if you will.
Wonderful, Brian. So I wanted to double click a bit on how somebody that may be watching this can do some of the things that you have been doing, especially from the perspective of understanding their customer journeys to the level and the depth that you do. Can you talk about maybe any of the projects that you've done recently or in the past where you were faced with a challenge of evaluating customer journeys, where you had to really get to the heart of what's going on with the customer? And the customer could be the end consumer, or it could be another type of customer that you were engaging with. Can you just share some experiences over there on how you dived into it and how you uncovered insights that were useful?
Absolutely. Probably one of our most proudest is our first, particularly in the innovation space, and it was well before innovation was a thing. So when I first came to the airport was not necessarily influential. It didn't necessarily step forward and address issues at security. That was very much viewed as a relationship between the Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, and the airline. So unfortunately, because of some finger pointing, our customers were waiting 45 minutes to 60 minutes to get through our security checkpoint. We already know as an industry that security in itself just creates a tremendous amount of anxiety, and it's a miserable experience. The other element is human behavior. Your perception of time might be a little bit different than my perception of time, and so on and so on. So you have the worst type scenario back when at our security checkpoint where I walk into the front door, I see a line that leads outside of security. I know how deep security is. So I'm already trying to calculate in my head, am I going to make my flight or am I going to miss it? So the anxiety goes up, the anger goes up. It was a horrible, horrible situation. Not good for the consumer. So we stepped forward as the airport and created or asserted our influence, if you will. But there wasn't a common solution. So we went abroad and we found essentially back then it was a Bluetooth sniffer, a sensor. And it was before IoT was even IoT. So we found this solution that was used for retail and outdoor roadways. We actually put it in our security checkpoint. And when I said before, well, how do we know it's valid science? We actually partnered with a very prestigious university in the US who had done studies in this field. And they worked side by side with us to prove the technology was highly, highly accurate, which once we had the trust in the product, then we started exuding the trust in our tenants, the airline and the TSA, and helping them understand we're going to use this device and it's going to help us understand exactly what's going on. It wasn't for finger pointing. It was just simply, let's start measuring what our customer is dealing with and separate fact from fiction. And fast forward, we ended up being the first airport in the US to actually use Bluetooth and Wi-Fi sniffers at our security checkpoint to figure out customer wait times. And mysteriously, as many research elements will show, if you measure something, it typically will improve. So because we started measuring it and we started showing what the performance numbers were, not just to the customer, but to the employee group, mysteriously, our wait times dramatically diminished. And now, pre-COVID, we are in a typical environment where our average wait time was less than 15 minutes. So not too terribly bad. And of course, with collective data, you start getting into predictive analytics. But we truly learned from that experience, there's opportunities or solutions outside the industry, go find them. There's opportunities to confirm whether that science is accurate, go work with university partners, and let's try to create a confluence together that makes for a good end state.
This was an incredible experience shared, Brian, and I'll tell you why. I mean, obviously this is great. I'm thinking of it in terms of customer journey vernacular. And so what you very effectively did was you identified a key pain point, or what we call a pit point, that is right there in it's commonplace in several airports on these long wait times, right? And instead of not taking ownership of it, what I understood was you stepped in, you took ownership of that, you identified that that was a key pain point that, if improved, should be improved. And then you went and found a solution for it. So, bravo, that's incredible. I wanted to ask you, in terms of the impact of that. So once this was done and you measured it and you identified, that we could improve on this now, what was the result for the airport? What was the result for you? What was the result for the consumer? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And because it's technology related, typically one of the questions is, well, what's the ROI? What was your ROI on that investment?
Right.
I can comfortably say that ROI far exceeded any expectation. Number one, low cost of entry, low cost basic technology solution that provided us data points that we fixed a problem that absolutely existed for us. But where the intangibles came from was we expanded that solution so it's on our roadways to our gateways. So now we understand, as a consumer is coming into the airport, are they using off-airport parking or are they using one of our parking solutions? Now we have a better understanding of retail applications. And what is it that we should be doing from a competitive set to make sure that people are parking with us, increasing our revenues, as opposed to parking with a competitor? Then there's the aspect of, okay, I made it through the security checkpoint. Great, I didn't have to wait. But what are the implications to our concessionaires on the secure side of the house, where wouldn't it help them to know what the customer volume is that's coming at them so that they can staff accordingly? And then I'm not just trading one line for another line. So nobody wants to wait in line for Starbucks or McDonald's, what have you. So really, it's that just whole major influence along that journey point. And we continue to, as we call it, bookends, we continue to move those bookends further and further out as far as we can, if we have access to data, to understand what's happening to our consumer and how do we share that information with our tenant base to ultimately improve the product. Again, it's not just the airline's customer, it's absolutely our customer. They're coming into our home. We want to make sure that we're ready for when they come through our front door.
This keeps getting better and better. When you were on this path to go do that first pilot, or when you were making a case internally for doing this, had you planned or had you been able to forecast that if this goes well, then the impact would be as widespread as not just reducing the wait times, but then what's the benefit or the impact once those wait lines get reduced? Or were these all just incremental advantages that just came with it?
So I would say it's a bit of both. Number one, there was a tremendous amount of risk that was taken, right? And just when I say tremendous, not necessarily on the cost side, it's the reputational aspect of, okay, is technology really going to solve this problem? And hands down, I would say it's not just technology, it's the talent that went with it. So it was our team that had to interpret the data to make sense of it, to make sure that it was actually doing something beneficial. So that was a critical learning aspect all to itself. And once we understood that, okay, not only do we have data, not only are we using technology, but we've developed a sense of trust across organizations that we're going to work with each other in this fashion. And that created a coalition well beyond anyone's imagination between airlines and regulatory agencies to figure out, okay, we're serving a common purpose here. One of us does not want to be the cog that breaks and does not keep the wheel moving. So let's figure that perspective out. But the retail aspect, the consumer relief, all of those elements, while we suspected, and when I say we, the group that was working on the project, while we suspected that may have been the case, we didn't want to oversell the product and say, well, beforehand, oh, this is what it can do, because that becomes really the silver bullet. It solves everything when it's really not the case. So we ended up really kind of what I call flying under the radar and having a sense of what it could do, but not necessarily broadcasting it until we confirmed it. And once it was confirmed, then we went back to the audience to say, and look what else it can do.
Yeah, now that's very astute strategy. In our work, when we do similar customer journey mapping or customer journey research with clients, then we tell them not to broadcast any projections as well before the data and the insights come in. But what we do consult with them, and I picked up a little bit of that as well in your comment, that's something we recommend as well to clients, that plan for a little bit of impact. Don't broadcast it, but still plan for what is the itch you're trying to solve with this type of an engagement, right? And then if you do solve it, what is the type of impact that you are trying to achieve or attain within your organization? And the reason that's important is, as you know, a lot of times when this type of research or fact finding goes on, there are insights that come in and they're nice to know, but nothing ever gets done about that, right? But if you're planning for a certain impact, then you know you're finding the solution for that impact. In your case, it was so evident that it had to make an impact or a dent in the waiting times. That right there was a key metric. But I'm really glad that, there was such an overflow of, the positive impact that one reduction in time had throughout, your business. So that's great.
Well, and you appreciate this industry for what it is, right? So we are highly structured, tremendous focus on security and safety, and typically risk adverse. So when we take it back to not broadcasting, it was very much a situation where let's keep an open mind to not only this problem statement, but let's keep an open mind of perhaps what else it could do. And again, I go back to our university partners. We end up taking a lot of our data sets since then, and we give it to our university partners to suggest you call through the data, and if you find something, let us know. Because we're coming at it with an aviation blinder on, not necessarily thinking about other implications. So, one of the interesting facets right now is something in the university space or something in the data space called fuzzy logic. And fuzzy logic is kind of what it sounds like. It's disparate information that when overlapped with each other, you actually find a pattern. And is that pattern a good pattern or is it a bad pattern? And you can subsequently do or react to it once you discover it. But in order to clear the fuzziness, you have to get your data sets in, and you really have to use talented individuals that understand that space to find the unknown. And that's where it becomes fascinating for us and really inspiring for what is the unknown. Because we think we know, we think we're all industry experts, but that's not necessarily the case. We can always learn more. What's out there from our partners that we can even improve further.
I know this went well, and it seems like it's, you're continuing to build on the impact and the effort that went into making this project a success. I know sometimes it happens that hindsight is always 2020, right? And then
Sure.
you reflect back on how things went. Was there anything that you feel could have been done better? Or, as you focus on improving the customer experience further, are there things that you may do differently going forward if you had to do a similar, engagement or a project again in the future?
So that one exercise that I just took you through and we focused quite a bit on has really been a tremendous help and an advocate for what it is that makes CVG perhaps a little bit different. So when COVID came along and the silver bullets started getting shot left and right, there wasn't a day where I would get at least 10 to 15 different calls or emails saying, you have to try our product that kills COVID. So overwhelming information, but we learned through that first iteration with sensor technology a long time ago. Wait a minute, let's confirm the science. We're not going to buy the product. We're going to pilot the product, and this is how long we're going to take with the product, and we'll validate it. And if we're comfortable validating it and not just taking it at face value, then we'll put it into place. And oh, by the way, we're not necessarily going to take it directly to our customer, the individuals that are coming through the front door. We're going to work with our internal customers first to make sure that they're comfortable with it, meaning our housekeepers or our airline tenants or our regulatory agencies. So it really goes back to that employee environment and working very closely together to make sure that whatever we're doing, they're with us and they agree with the concept, they agree with the product, and they find it beneficial, that it's efficient and effective for them, just as much as it brings goodwill to the customer. So tremendous learning opportunity from that perspective. And I can say comfortably that we probably saved hundreds of hours, not just chasing after wild concepts or wild goose chases. Frankly, we were able to eliminate quite a bit of information around UV lighting. For a period of time there, UV lighting was it. But in order for UV lighting to be effective in killing COVID, it has to be a concentrated light in a very small area. And if it's a large area, then really you can't have customers walking through that space. So we really need to know our limits. And that whole experience on UV lighting really kind of pushed us to air quality and then pushed us into surface protectants and finding new products out there that just previously people didn't really know existed. And one of the elements that we've learned very quickly is graphene, which is a form of carbon, right? So graphene mixed with limestone actually creates a very barbed molecular structure that's smaller than COVID or smaller than virus and bacteria. So when bacteria and viruses fall onto this product, onto this paint, basically it's shredded and it makes it inviable at that point. So you're mitigating risk not only through paint, but that paint also does a tremendous number of other elements because of graphene's potential. Heating, flexibility, durability. So phenomenal science behind what COVID actually unintentionally brought us.
So, Brian, I guess my final question to you is, with all the different improvements and tools and techniques that you've been trying in really to enhance the customer experience, and I know you've raised a very good point about piloting them first as well, as opposed to obviously going into face values. Um, do you also, once something has sort of passed the sniff test and they've been successfully piloted, do you also continue to test their validity or the impact they're having on the customer? If they are having the desired impact, do you continue to do that, once they're in the launch stages or on an ongoing format, just to ensure that they continue to have the impact that you want them to?
Absolutely. And that's where that pilot testing comes in. Once the pilot testing is done, then we make a decision, go or no go. If it's no go, we ask the company perhaps sometime again in the future, but this is what we found wrong with it. This is where the product should be improved. In some respects, we've had vendors that are very open to working with us to further improve their product. And frankly, that's what we're tremendously about at CVG. It's not the product that you're bringing to us. It's actually the product that we want to work together and develop, not just for aviation, but perhaps for other industries as well. There's a lot of other industries that are eerily similar to aviation. So from a reach, now the vendor appreciates, okay, so you're willing to help me improve my product and you're willing to back it and back it up with your brand. Absolutely. And that's where we're putting our name behind our brand and our brand behind the product that says we're comfortable, we tested this, we validated it with our university partners, our scientists, and that we absolutely will stand behind it. And not only will we stand behind it, but we anticipate and expect fully that it will continue to be improved over the life of that product or into the next iteration. So that's why we've found ourselves into robotics, into scientific paint, definitely into tremendous opportunities around, unfortunately, pandemic prevention. And to kind of like bundle all of that up is to recognize this is not just a CVG thing. This is, yes, bring the product into CVG. Let's make it valuable and provable. And once that's done, we absolutely want to support taking it to industry abroad. And again, not just aviation, but industries outside of aviation. So there's a tremendous value proposition to our colleague vendors.
That's very, very astute of you, Brian, and very insightful as well. Thank you for sharing that. Because, I think what has really come forth to me from this discussion is you have such a micro focus on different things that could make a positive impact on the customer's journey, their overall experience with CVG. you actually remind me of one of my other good friends and clients in this space, um, uh, Nika Allen. She's the director of aviation at Albuquerque, and I remember, in one of the things that she was doing, and she talks about it in a similar interview that I've done with her, where while she was also focused on these minute, moments, there was something that she mentioned that I connected with, and you reminded me of her as well, where as she was focusing on the customer journey, there was one point in the parking area at the airport where they were thinking of putting in a technical tool or leveraging new technology to improve the customer's experience, or so they thought. That was the hypothesis. And then when she uncovered these customer journeys and these nuances, what she identified was with, with people that were using the parking provided by the airport, the experience was enhanced when they had an attendant over there that greeted them and right when they were leaving or when they were checking in. And research uncovered that replacing that human connection with a tech tool could be counterproductive to the customer's experience. So I just wanted, I know that's a little different from leveraging tools, but the reason I wanted to mention that was it's again focusing on that customer journey, on these finer nuances, how you have been doing as well. And Nika just did it differently, but I think the impact is the same. How do we pilot them? How do we recognize them? And how do we incorporate things, that will have the desired impact on the customer's experience that you're intending them to?
Of course, and Hika's placement is absolutely right. So technology is not going to solve everything, and unfortunately, there's a sector of the population that believes that technology is going to solve everything, and that's where I go back to. It's the talent that comes along with the technology. If you take similarities between Albuquerque and CVG, people have questioned us. Well, why are you getting into robotics? Our interest in robotics is not job replacement. Our interest is, can we reallocate staff to where they're most needed? So is it better to have a bag driver just going from spot A to spot B? Or is it better to take that individual off that tug and to put them in front of the customer or put them plainside to load the aircraft where it's more critically needed? So when you start thinking ahead about, well, what if we ever experience a job shortage, or in COVID, what if we experience job outages simply because people are sick? Is that where technology can help fill the gap, and the resources, the talent that we have in our people, we can absolutely put right in front of the consumer or where it matters the most. And those are the pieces that we really have to be delicate in working together to make sure that they fit perfectly, and that we're not just doing tech for tech's sake.
I think that's a great closing statement, Brian, because you're absolutely right. Anybody who leverages tech just because they're a tech lover doesn't make sense. But if you're leveraging it like you did from the standpoint of how does this make a positive impact on the customer's experience, then that is a valid case. And I think, I tip my hat to you that your focus is more on really just enhancing the customer's journey and their experience, and you're finding tools that do that. So I think that's great. I think that's a great experience shared, and thank you again for taking the time. I know we've taken more than we had planned, but I think that's what happens when we start chatting, right, on topics that we're equally passionate about.
Passion is the key word. Absolutely, Nitin. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Brian.